For more than 4 decades, Reba McEntire was the face of country music's grace. Smiling on stage, polite in interviews, loyal to the industry that made her a legend. But behind the sequins and the spotlight, a quiet storm had been building. In Nashville, people whispered that she remembered everything, every slight, every betrayal, every silence that cut deeper than words. And when the Grand Ole Opry celebrated its 100th anniversary, she finally let that truth slip. One sentence, spoken softly backstage, would shake country music's most sacred institution to its core. The whisper that shook Nashville. It happened on a night meant to honor unity, a century of country music history under one roof. The Opry's 100th anniversary had drawn legends, newcomers, and cameras from every major network. Reba arrived dressed for celebration, but those who saw her up close sensed something else, composure laced with distance, like a woman rehearsing not a song, but a reckoning. When a reporter asked how it felt to return for such a milestone, Reba smiled politely. Then she leaned forward and whispered, "You know what you did." There were no names, no explanations. But the words carried a weight that stopped conversations mid-sentence. Within hours, publicists were whispering, journalists were calling their editors, and backstage staff were texting each other in disbelief. Nashville runs on rumor. But this wasn't gossip. It was a warning. Those who've known Reba longest say she doesn't speak by accident. She measures her words carefully, lets years pass before choosing her moment. And that night, it seemed she had reached the end of her patience. For decades, she had carried 5 betrayals, wounds that shaped her silence and, some say, changed her career. The Vince Gill betrayal. The 2001 Country Music Association Awards were supposed to be one of the proudest nights of Reba McEntire's career. A celebration of everything she had built through decades of relentless work, heartbreak, and triumph. The producers had planned a special duet to honor her contributions to country music, a symbolic passing of the torch between 2 generations. Reba was at the height of her confidence then, elegant, respected, and universally admired. The performance was meant to show that even after all these years, she could still command the stage like no one else. Rehearsals went smoothly. The dress was custom-made, a deep red gown that shimmered under the stage lights. The arrangements were finalized, and her team received the schedule confirming her slot. Everyone was ready. Then, just hours before the final run-through, her manager got a call. The duet was off. Without warning, her name had been quietly removed from the performance list. In her place, the show would feature Vince Gill. At first, her team thought it was a mistake, but when the official list was distributed, the truth sank in. There was no explanation, no apology, just silence. The public heard that creative changes had been made. The press release cited scheduling conflicts. But Nashville insiders understood that this wasn't about timing. It was about politics. By then, Vince Gill had become one of the most influential men in the Opry circle. His charm, reputation, and friendships within the CMA board made him untouchable. If he wanted something, few dared say no. Reba didn't confront anyone. That wasn't her way. She performed her solo number as planned, smiled for the cameras, and slipped out of the venue before the final curtain call. Those who saw her backstage later described her expression as calm but distant, the look of someone who had learned a painful lesson about loyalty in a town that often rewarded silence over honesty. Privately, she was heartbroken. It wasn't just that she'd been replaced. It was who had replaced her. Vince wasn't a stranger. They had shared countless performances, charity events, and late-night rehearsals. She admired him, trusted him, believed they stood for the same values. When he stayed silent through her exclusion, it wasn't a professional slight. It was personal. Friends say that night marked a subtle but permanent shift in Reba's attitude toward the industry. She stopped assuming that friendship guaranteed fairness. She began to watch more carefully who spoke up and who didn't, when the politics turned cruel. Years later, when asked about her lowest moments, she didn't name names but admitted, "There was a performance that never aired, one that broke something inside me." Fans thought she was referring to a lost concert or a scrapped special, but those who knew the story understood exactly what she meant. That night wasn't just about losing a song. It was about losing trust, the kind that takes a lifetime to earn and only a moment to destroy. The Travis Tritt exclusion. If the Vince Gill incident was a silent betrayal, the one involving Travis Tritt was deliberate, a wound that cut deeper because it revealed just how easily respect could be traded for ego. In the early 2000s, Nashville was buzzing with excitement over a massive collaborative project. It was meant to be a unifying anthem, a celebration of country music's roots, power, and longevity. Every major name in the genre was being considered, and when Reba McEntire's invitation came, it felt right. She had been the backbone of country music for decades, the bridge between the classic era and a new generation of artists. The song's concept was simple: gather the biggest voices to sing about pride, tradition, and endurance. Reba loved the idea. She recorded demos, cleared her schedule, and prepared to join the all-star session. But weeks later, when the official lineup was released, her name was gone. According to multiple sources who were in the studio at the time, Travis Tritt had quietly voiced his objections. He reportedly told producers that the song was meant to be a men's anthem, that Reba's inclusion would make it less authentic. Some said he was concerned that her powerhouse presence would overshadow his own. Others blamed old-school gatekeeping, the unspoken belief that certain songs, stages, and symbols of tradition belonged to men. Whatever his reasoning, his opinion carried weight. Producers listened. And Reba was erased. She didn't find out from the label or her team. She found out from a friend on the studio staff who called to warn her before the news broke. For Reba, the sting wasn't just professional embarrassment. It was the quiet cruelty of realizing that someone she had supported publicly had worked behind the scenes to keep her out. Still, she said nothing. Months later, she agreed to perform at a Georgia charity concert organized largely by Tritt's management circle. It was supposed to be a night of goodwill and community. Reba rehearsed her set, prepared her band, and even donated part of her fee back to the cause. Then, a few days before the event, her assistant received a short message from organizers. Her performance had been canceled. No explanation, no replacement slot, nothing. When reporters followed up, they were told her act no longer fit the tone of the evening. The phrasing was vague, deliberately so. But those close to Reba understood what it meant. She'd been excluded again. That was the moment her patience hardened into clarity. In Nashville, Reba had always been known for her diplomacy. She avoided public feuds, never spoke harshly about others, and kept her focus on the music. But this time, the silence spoke volumes. When asked about Tritt in an interview months later, she smiled and replied calmly, "We don't sing in the same key." To most people, it sounded like a clever one-liner, but to those within the industry, it was a quiet thunderclap. Reba wasn't talking about pitch or harmony. She was talking about principles, about the kind of men who closed doors in the same rooms where they once shook her hand. From that point on, Reba began stepping away from projects dominated by male gatekeepers. She focused on her television work, her own record label, and her growing control over her career. She had learned that respect in Nashville wasn't always earned by talent. Sometimes it had to be reclaimed by walking away. That year marked a quiet transformation for Reba McEntire. She was no longer just the queen of country charm. She was a woman who had seen too much to pretend that the system was fair, and from that point forward, she played by her own rules. Tanya Tucker, a friendship that fell apart. Before the rivalry, there was friendship. In the 1980s and early 90s, Reba McEntire and Tanya Tucker were seen as two women redefining what it meant to be strong in country music. They shared stages, traded compliments in interviews, and defended each other in a business that often pitted women against one another. But that alliance didn't last. In the mid-1990s, Reba was in negotiations to co-host a televised Country Music Hall of Fame tribute, a prestigious event celebrating the pioneers of the genre. Producers saw her as the natural choice, respected, eloquent, and already a symbol of country's golden era. Then, at the last moment, everything changed. Tanya Tucker's team reportedly struck a deal behind the scenes, offering producers exclusive tabloid access and backstage footage if Tanya could host the event alone. The offer worked. Reba was replaced without warning. She didn't hear it from Tanya. She heard it from her own publicist, blindsided by new promotional materials that no longer included her name. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. Reba stayed composed in public, but those close to her said she was crushed. The quiet distance that followed became permanent. At red carpet events, the two barely acknowledged each other. Industry insiders noticed. The camaraderie was gone. Years later, in 2014, the final fracture came. The Country Music Association organized a star-studded all-female tribute honoring the pioneers of country. Tanya Tucker led the performance. Reba McEntire, one of the most influential women in the genre's history, wasn't invited. When fans began asking questions online, Tanya posted a short, dismissive message. "Not everyone gets an invite to the party." No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. Reba said nothing publicly, but that silence spoke volumes. Friends say she never forgot it. Not the hosting betrayal, not the exclusion, not the indifference. In a world where reputation means everything, Tanya's actions had turned friendship into competition, and competition into quiet resentment. Naomi Judd's memorial and the breaking point. By 2022, Reba McEntire had survived heartbreak, career shifts, and loss. But nothing prepared her for the moment that should have been about healing, and turned into another wound. When country legend Naomi Judd passed away, the industry came together for a televised memorial. Reba was invited to close the show with a final emotional performance, a song chosen specifically to honor both Naomi's legacy and Reba's connection to the Judds. She rehearsed carefully, adjusted her tour schedule, and approached the event with deep sincerity. Naomi wasn't just a peer, she was a friend. Then, just one day before the memorial, everything changed. Two Opry-affiliated board members intervened and reshuffled the program. Reba's performance slot was cut down. Her position in the lineup was moved forward, away from the finale. There was no phone call, no explanation, only a revised schedule emailed to her team. Both board members had history with Reba. One had previously clashed with her over Opry scheduling decisions. The other, years earlier, had allegedly questioned her prominence on televised specials, calling her over-featured. Reba showed up anyway. She sang beautifully, then left quietly. No after-party, no interviews, no smiles, just silence. Weeks later, on a podcast, she was asked about the memorial. Her answer was brief. "That night broke my heart in more ways than one." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. For her fans, that moment became symbolic. Reba's sadness wasn't about fame or airtime. It was about respect, about losing the right to say goodbye on her own terms. Those close to her say that after Naomi's memorial, something in Reba changed. She stopped pretending that silence was grace. She began writing, not lyrics, but memories. Stories she'd kept locked away for decades, ready to tell when the time was right. And when she whispered, "You know what you did" at the Opry's 100th anniversary, those who knew her best understood. This was the reckoning, the fifth betrayal and the unfinished reckoning. The fifth betrayal remains the one she refuses to name. Those close to her say it involved a co-headlining tour in the early 2000s, a major deal negotiated privately, meant to bring together two of country's biggest stars. Reba had cleared her schedule, approved marketing materials, and begun rehearsing. Then, overnight, the project disappeared. Another artist took her place. The tour went ahead without her. There was no call, no explanation, only silence. Again. Some point to Garth Brooks, others whisper Alan Jackson. A few mention a powerful Opry board member who also managed major acts at the time. Whoever it was, Reba's trust was shattered. This wasn't just a lost tour. It was a public humiliation. Those around her say it marked the end of her willingness to depend on others in Nashville's inner circle. She became more independent, more cautious, and in her own way, more powerful. In her later interviews and unpublished memoir drafts, Reba began leaving clues. Paragraphs about a deal made in shadows or a promise that vanished overnight. Fans online have dissected every line, linking them to real events. The CMA Awards, the Hall of Fame Gala, the Judd Memorial. One passage stands out. She writes, "Sometimes the curtain falls not because the show is over, but because someone pulled it early." She never says who. But maybe she doesn't need to. The people involved already know. Reba McEntire has spent her life mastering the art of restraint, smiling while others took credit, forgiving in public what she couldn't forgive in private. But now, her silence carries more power than any song she's ever sung. Maybe she'll never name them. Maybe she doesn't have to. The truth is already echoing through Nashville's walls. Who do you think were the 5 Opry legends Reba was referring to? Leave your thoughts below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from behind country music's brightest lights.